Showing on Law Weekly today, we talk about the just concluded 2019 elections and some of the issues arising from it. Our guest is a senior advocate of Nigeria, Oyetibo. We also have the reactions of some lawyers to the inconclusive and supplementary elections, plus our recap of the top trending stories from the courtrooms. Hello and welcome to the program. I am Shola Shuyeli. The conduct and management of the 2019 elections, the high number of elections that were declared inconclusive, remain talking points for a large number of people. To enrich the discussions, I had a chat with a senior advocate of Nigeria to get his views on some of these prevailing issues. I began by asking Mr. Oyetibo his general opinions on the conduct of the polls.
Well, I think this particular election, voters were highly sensitized and they had great expectations. That first postponement sort of dampened interests. And then when INEC came out to say that no more campaign, no more sensitization, I felt that was not good enough. And I think I reached out to a few people who could make their voice known to the appropriate authorities that that was wrong. Wrong because when you put your mind on something, as it was done by everyone who wanted to vote on that day, and at the last minute, when people had started going out to their polling booths, there were announcements all over the place that election has been postponed. You need a lot of sensitization to get people to come back to appreciate the need to go out and vote. So if INEC had insisted on not allowing people to campaign, you would have found that maybe not up to half of those who eventually voted would have come out, because many people had lost interest in the whole exercise. And I believe it must actually have affected the number of people who actually voted for the presidential election, definitely. If the election had taken place on that first day, we would have got more voters, most certainly.
We had a number of elections that turned out to be declared inconclusive, so much so that it has continued to generate so much debate. Even the Speaker of the House of Reps recently came out to caution INEC against setting a dangerous precedent with this declaration of elections as inconclusive. What do you think?
Well, you see, declaration of elections as being inconclusive could be partly due to INEC's fault and partly not to INEC's fault. Not due to INEC's fault if there was no clear margin of success by any of the candidates. If the margin of success by the highest candidate in terms of the votes that were cast is not more than the votes that had actually been cancelled or that where election did not take place, you definitely have to conduct election in those areas to be able to get a clear margin of success by a candidate. So that will not be due to INEC's fault, because you have to meet the requirements of the law to be able to return a candidate as having scored a majority of lawful votes cast at the election. But where you could have INEC being culpable is where, for example, the votes that were arrogated to a particular candidate had been inflated so as to close the margin, and then you turn around to declare inconclusive election. That would be due to INEC's fault.
Do you think that some of the incidences that occasioned this declaration of elections as inconclusive in some places could have been avoided if the president had signed the Electoral Act Amendment Bill of 2018-2019 into law and INEC had ensured strict adherence of the use of the card readers?
Well, I'll tell you this. I think there was a failure of a security. If we have a security system that cannot gather intelligence ahead of all this outbreak of violence and nip it in the bud, Because we've been conducting elections since the 60s. So you know the red flag areas. I expect the intelligence agencies, the security agencies, to have conducted due diligence about all these areas and then ensure that they are proactive to nip in the bud the outbreak of violence so that there will be smooth election. We can't be talking of violence that is preventing elections in some areas in 2019. I do not think it's an acceptable development for our democracy at all.
You talked a lot about the violence that played out, but we had military deployed in some places. Couldn't that have worked and helped to forestall some of this violence that we saw that broke out?
Election is a civil process. And when you are dealing with civil process, it is the police that should be in charge. However, if there is a threat to internal security during elections, you can call in the military. But the military cannot play a primary role in the conduct of elections in Nigeria, because that is not part of their role. It is certainly not part of their role. And it is regrettable that you now have a situation in which the police and the military and the army will be struggling to control collation centers in an election. What has the army got to do with the collation of election results? Absolutely nothing. They have nothing, they have no role whatsoever. So they should take the back seat. It is when the situation has developed that the police will be incapable of coping with the internal insecurity, that you can then have a backup from the military. That should be the role reserved for the military in every election. They shouldn't be involved in any way whatsoever.
Let's look at the powers of the courts to intervene or stop collation of results. I've heard some lawyers cite Section 87(1) of the Electoral Act, that the court cannot stop the election process. But some also cite Section 26(3) and 26 sub 5, which empowers INEC to go back and do a final collation of results and also empowers a contestant to challenge same in court. How do you balance that?
Generally, the provision says that the court cannot stop the conduct of an election. It's there, it's now settled that going by the experiences in the past, even before 2015, when there were a series of orders being issued across the country, stopping elections here and there, that was the history behind the provision, stopping courts or preventing courts from issuing orders that could interfere with the holding of an election. So, having said that, if an election has been conducted and the results are to be announced, I mean, it goes without saying that you conduct an election, you must announce a result. It's because election is a process. If it is a process where you start the process, it must lead to a conclusion, which is the announcement of the result and the issuance of the appropriate certificates to the winner of the election. That is when you now say that you have had an election. It is useless if you vote and there's no result. I mean, that is a sheer waste of time. It is only when you vote and the votes are counted and then the result sheets are filled and then the winner is announced, and from the polling booth you go to the ward collation center, from the ward collation center you go to the local government collation center, and then from the local government collation center, if it's the National Assembly, you go to the senatorial collation center, and if it's state, you go to the state collation center. That is when you can say that there had been an election. All these processes must be complied with for you to have an election. Otherwise, it would then be alleged that the election was not conducted in accordance with the provisions of the Electoral Act, which is a ground for nullifying an election.
But talking about the courts, what remedies lie in the courts? Because I've also heard some lawyers say that there's so many hurdles placed in the parts of petitioners with proving election malpractices, especially with the presidential elections.
For presidential, I will agree with you to some extent. Because the principle is that if you allege that people were disenfranchised in a particular area, you must call voters in each of the polling stations. And you know how many polling stations are in Nigeria? So if you are dealing with presidential election, there is a problem. There is a problem.
Created by the laws.
Created by the laws and the judicial decisions that have been handed down over the years on how to prove electoral malpractices during elections. But more importantly, you can prove non-compliance with the Electoral Act in some other ways. For example, we've been talking of violence. If there was a widespread outbreak of violence in a particular community, I don't see any normal human being who will go out to go and cast his vote when people are crossfiring. When you are hearing bullets all over the place, that cannot be an election. Because majority of the people who love their lives will not come out to go and vote. So that means you have disenfranchised quite a large number of people who would ordinarily have come out to vote in such locality. That could be a ground. That is for that locality. And if you now have an outbreak of violence in a number of localities, in a number of states, in a number of communities, you can aggregate them, bring them together, and see how many registered voters are in that locality, how many collected their PVC, are potential, what you call potential voters. When you have disenfranchised them, if you add them to what the margin, if they are more, you can nullify the election.
The hurdles that you've identified, how do we go around them?
Yes, deal with them before the election. That is ensuring that the register of voters are properly updated, ensuring that the card reader machine sends the result real time. Because what we discovered in the last election is that the card reader was not sending results to INEC server instantaneously, which people had thought was the position. That was not the position. So what they were doing is that the card reader will store the information. After the election, they will start sending the information to INEC server as you send SMS. And you know what happens when you send bulk SMS. Not all the information leaves the handset, your phone. Similarly, not all the results in the card reader will leave the machine to move to INEC server. So there was a disparity between the number of voters at the polling station and the number of voters that were sent to INEC server at the headquarters. Evidence emerged at the election petitions that we had in 2015 in almost all the states. But people thought then that the card reader was real time. That is, it could generate information and send directly to INEC server as it verifies the voters. But that wasn't the situation. So I don't know what they have this particular year. If it's still the same thing, you still have the same problem all over the states.
Let's round off with agenda setting for the president. The first 4 years, he said he was going to focus on the economy, fighting graft and security. But now he's won another 4 years. What do you think that he should focus on?
I think emphasis should now be focused on fighting poverty. There's poverty in Nigeria, real-time poverty. Across the land, not peculiar to any particular state. Across Nigeria, there's a lot of poverty. You invest in programs that will touch the lives of the ordinary man, and then you create a conducive environment for the economy to thrive. Because people lose track of certain things, that it is not only the poor man that should be taken care of. You must be able to create a conducive environment for industries to grow. And it is not the poor man that will grow the industry, that will own the industry. So those who will own the industry, you must create a conducive environment for them to be able to sustain their industries and employ the poor people. And that is the mistake that the government makes. It is not just taking care of the poor people alone. You must create a conducive environment for the economy to grow. Because the poor people must be employed by the owners of the industries.
So government can employ everybody?
Government cannot employ everybody. It is the private sector that employs the largest number of labor. So, but if you drive the private sector out of business, what happens? It is the poor man that will suffer. So as you are providing for the poor man, you must also provide for the private sector. You must ensure that the private sector does not die. But that was what was happening before. The private sector was completely neglected. And that now translates to poverty of the poor. That is the symbiosis between them. So the government must focus attention on the private sector, ensure that there is a conducive environment for the private sector to thrive, so as to help in creating job opportunities for the labor market. It is then you can say that you are fighting poverty.